Rural India consumes about 40% of the total energy consumed in the country as of 2003-2004. Household energy consumption accounts for 89% of the rural energy consumption, and agriculture accounts for 11% of this. Rural household energy consumption accounts for 82% of the total household consumption in the country. And fuel wood, agricultural and animal wastes account for 81% of household energy consumption, and almost all of this is in the rural sector. Bulk of the above non-commercial energy is used for cooking, heating, and mostly this is done in inefficient and polluting ways. All of us know these facts. I'm just highlighting them as they are given in the report of the Export Committee on Integrated Energy Policy 2006. And as far as the agriculture sector is concerned, nearly 50% of the energy consumed by agriculture is accounted for by electricity. And most of us who are here know the story of agricultural subsidies for electricity given and all the negative externalities that have happened because of that. Electricity consumption in agriculture today accounts for nearly 20% of the total electricity consumption in the country. In fact, Dr. Sri Kumar gave the figure of 25%. Some of the reports say that in 2006-2007 it's come down a little bit and it's around 20%. The average cost per unit of electricity supply to the agricultural sector is among the highest because you have to take distribution lines to remote areas where the population is highly dispersed. And it would definitely be more than 3 rupees per unit. And if you look at the average revenue realized from the agricultural sector, taking into consideration only those states which have a very significant proportion of agricultural consumption, you will find that the revenue realization is only around 50 paise, which ranges from 0 paise in Tamil Nadu, the state from where I come, to about 75 paise in some states like Maharashtra and one more state that I saw. The result of these kind of subsidies that have been given for agricultural electricity, the government subsidy amount, did you have the government subsidies that have gone for electricity consumption between 1993 and 2006 are to the tune of 1,15,000 crores of Indian rupees. In spite of these subsidies, most of the electric utilities are in the red. There is no metering of agricultural consumption because all the electric utilities found out that if they are not going to collect much revenue from the agricultural consumers, there is no point in metering them and spending money on the workforce which will go and meter and maintain. So they did away with the metering, and as a result of that, we have 33% to 45% technical and commercial losses. These are technically called transmission and distribution losses, and one of our electricity ministers said they are actually theft and dacoity losses. Because of a significant proportion of the consumption that's not metered, it encourages a lot of illegal drawal from the system, and therefore you have technical and commercial losses. These are the euphemism for theft is commercial losses, and those are very significant, as was pointed out in some of the figures earlier. Now, because agricultural consumption is not metered and people don't pay on the basis of per unit of energy consumed, there is indiscriminate use of groundwater, and farmers and other agricultural users don't worry about using inefficient pump sets because they are anyway not paying for the energy, so they might as well use cheaper inefficient pump sets. The quality of supply, because of the gap between the revenue that is available and the revenue and the kind of needs that is and the kind of infrastructure that is needed to meet the growing demand, this gap is very high, and the electric utilities that are already in the red are not able to bridge this gap, and therefore it ends up in poor quality of supply, which is erratic and highly inadequate. This results in significant opportunity costs of access, particularly for the rural population, because urban populations can make a big noise and politically have an impact when there are disruptions in their supply. Therefore, the highly dispersed rural populations face bulk of this problem in terms of long hours of power cut, erratic supply, voltage fluctuations, and therefore their motors and other machines burning out. So in this context, where bulk of the rural energy is consumed in the form of non-commercial energy sources that are gathered for cooking and other heating purposes in the households, and whatever commercial energy is consumed is mostly in the form of electricity by the agricultural sector. What happens is the market price of access to energy in rural areas is very low, but on the other hand, because of all the imbalances in the system, the opportunity cost of access to this energy on the other hand is very high. People are paying for this in different ways, by not having adequate supply, by having motors burning out, and things like that. So already in this context, if you also want to increase the share of renewable resources, if you want renewable resources to contribute a higher share of the commercial energy in order to address climate change and other types of energy security issues, then the cost of supply will go up even further for electricity. Because the way it is done, as Professor Ranganathan was talking this morning, in India we have a cost plus form of regulation. Added to that, based on the provision in the Electricity Supply Act, many of the regulatory commissions are requiring utilities to get a certain percentage of their electricity from renewable energy, from renewable resources, and they also fix the price for this energy at a higher level. So basically, unlike in the US or in other Western countries where the regulatory commission either fixes the quantity of renewable energy that has to be absorbed and leaves the price for this to the market through tradable permits, or they fix a feed-in price, which is a higher price than the market price, and the quantity that comes in depends on the market. So one of the variables is fixed by the regulator and the other is based on the market response. Whereas in the Indian context, the Regulatory Commission specifies the percentage of renewable energy that has to be fed into the grid and also specifies a higher price at which it will have to be purchased. On the other hand, there is no penalty for fossil fuel based generation. You are giving an incentive for renewable based generation. There is no penalty for fossil fuel based generation, and therefore all the additional costs of this particular option of increasing the renewable energy is passed on to the final consumers. Now, in a scenario where 20 to 25% of the energy consumption is heavily subsidized, where the cost doesn't even recover 1/6 of the price of supplying, some of the other sectors like industry and commercial are currently cross-subsidizing, and the government tries to pay balance, if not the entire balance, at least a part of it. So with all this cross-subsidy and government subsidy going on, if the cost of supply goes up due to a higher share of renewable energy, this also cannot be passed on to the agricultural consumers in the existing political milieu and socio-economic conditions. So given that, and at the same time, it cannot also be passed on to the commercial and industrial consumers, because already they are bearing a heavy burden and they are already losing their competitive edge, and if more of this cross subsidy is passed on to them, it will be impossible. Therefore, transferring the burden to other segments will also have limits. As a result, access to efficient commercial energy in rural areas may get further eroded. Already they have very poor access, and if you want to increase the renewable share in the existing arrangement for harnessing energy and supplying energy, this will be an additional burden which cannot be passed on to anybody, and this additional burden will ultimately translate in terms of higher opportunity costs of access for rural people, which means their energy security will be further eroded. So policies to promote use of renewable resources like biomass and biofuels for industrial and urban uses, if they are not sensitive to rural access, they could end up undermining the rural population's access to these resources also. The point I'm trying to make here is, in many of the resource-wise programs, there is things are not done in an integrated manner in terms of whether you want to promote biomass, whether you want to promote solar. There is a specific program which says we must have so many biomass gasifiers, either through the government or through any other agencies. They are driven by physical quantities, they are driven by certain specific agendas which are not based on relative cost considerations. And they are not based on considerations of what kind of access will different populations have to these resources if these policies are adopted. So given this, the existing institutional arrangement, in my opinion, is a big challenge in being able to afford rural populations to have greater access to energy. Existing institutional and pricing arrangements would, on the one hand, pose severe challenges for the rural sector's access to sufficient quantities of efficient and clean energy, more so in the context of increasing renewable shares. On the other hand, the environmental concern also throws up unique opportunities that could be made use of to significantly improve rural energy security. So I'm saying, on the one hand, if you continue with the existing arrangement, you're going to have major challenges for rural energy security. But the context of environmental concern and the opportunities for using renewable options could also be translated into unique opportunities that could enable better access to energy by the rural population. And this could be achieved by innovative changes in the institutional arrangements for owning, harnessing and distributing energy. Right now, what we have is a top-down approach for harnessing and using energy. Current policies and institutional arrangements for harnessing and utilizing energy are top-down. They are disjointed with respect to various sources. You have the Ministry of Power, the Ministry of Coal, the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. It's surprising, you wouldn't see anything about renewable energy being talked about in the website of the Ministry of Power. So each ministry, each particular subsector will have policies based on their own individual concern without an integrated approach. And it is heartening that for the first time in 2005, the energy policy took an integrated approach, and we have an integrated energy policy document, at least at the macro level. Now, these institutional arrangements also have created an urban bias. Urban access to energy resources is much better, even though it's inadequate. In comparison to rural access, it's much better. And the kind of arrangement, including the subsidies, have encouraged a lot of inefficiencies. A lot of these inefficiencies is because the existing institutions, whether they are government owned or regulated, as Sri Kumar pointed out, 85 to 86% of the ownership still rests with the government. So, and there are no incentive mechanisms to make them perform efficiently, financially, in a financial sense, and make them accountable for the quality and quantity of energy that they supply to the public. So, plus the way most of these projects have been funded is through plan allocations, and in order to get bigger and bigger plan allocations, people always thought of big projects, not worrying about the economics of whether for a particular context a bigger project would be more appropriate or a smaller project. For example, the fact that micro hydro projects did not really flourish in the earlier regime is a classic example of the nature of funding encouraging bigger projects, thermal or hydro. So if we move away from this top-down approach, which was also disjointed, to if we think of moving to a bottom-up approach which is also integrated. So the focus of this or the objectives of this alternate arrangement or the characteristic should be that it's decentralized, it's bottom-up, it's integrated with respect to various sources of energy, and I would like to emphasize it's rationally priced. I think the point that the first speaker, I'm sorry I'm not able to pronounce her name properly, so I'll avoid doing that, but the point that the first speaker was making today about the Kyoto Protocol on the one hand, and at the same time a country being concerned about its environmental and ecological balances, she was not actually contradicting herself as she was made out to be. I think what she was trying to say was, at the margin, whether it's cheaper to move out of conventional sources, taking into consideration the largest socio-economic issues within the country, or is it better to stay with your conventional resources? So the key thing is the pricing signals, or more than the pricing, the opportunity cost of the resources that you're using, or the methodology or the technology that you're using, should be reflected in the prices that people pay, at least in a relative sense, even if not in an absolute sense. So it may not be worthwhile to have zero environmental pollution, and it may not be worthwhile or feasible economically to have a complete renewable option. So the question is, at the margin, what is the social cost of using one option vis-a-vis the other? That should be the driving factor for the consideration of what proportion of emissions you should reduce or what proportion of renewable you should use. So instead of fixing an arbitrary number, saying that we'll cut it down by a certain percentage, it should be based on more rational socio-economic considerations. Which is the point I'm trying to make here also, in terms of utilizing the renewable resources, particularly in rural areas. It would be better if one can think of a local area in an integrated manner, look at all possible resources and options that are available in that area, and based on the opportunity cost of harnessing the locally available renewable resource vis-a-vis buying the commercial version from the urban areas, that should drive and decide the optimal combination of renewable and non-renewable share. So if we have a framework that has these characteristics, then it would not only facilitate harnessing renewable resources in a stable and sustainable manner, but would also significantly improve rural energy security. So in order to do this, I have an idea. I want to throw it to this audience and get your feedback on this, if not in this session, at least independently. I feel it might help a lot if we have rural energy cooperatives formed. Maybe at the block level or at a slightly higher level. And if these energy cooperatives can manage the energy services within their area of jurisdiction, in a way that they are bottom-up and integrated approach. This could be a way of operationalizing the bottom-up integrated approach that I envisaged in the earlier slide. So, for example, Sudhakar Reddy was saying that biogas might be a good viable option in a particular area, but individuals may not have the motivation or the incentive. But if you think of a possibility where the energy services in the rural area is managed by an energy cooperative, and if the entire village will benefit by making use of the economies of the biogas, manure and then feeding it, each individual doing it, you could realize some cost economies by taking it to the village level or the block level. And secondly, if we have these energy cooperatives, they could have the incentive to harness the resources available to them efficiently and manage them in a cost-effective manner. So, if the incentive structure, if the institutional arrangement and the incentive structures are clearly laid out in a fashion that will encourage this, then this could be achieved much better through the rural energy cooperatives, which would take a bottom-up integrated approach. In order to do this, now in this context, I want to emphasize the incentive aspect, because in the earlier aspects on privatization of power utilities, or in the context of subsidy and other issues, it's not a question of whether a private entity can deliver or a public entity can deliver. For example, Électricité de France, EDF in France, was a public sector enterprise for many years, and it was one of the first utilities to talk of marginal cost pricing, to talk of time of the day pricing. And the reason is, this utility had a contract with the government, where the government had laid out certain incentive structures for efficient performance of the utility, where it would reach power to the maximum number of people at the minimum cost and maximum efficiency. So even though it was a public ownership, the incentive mechanisms were in place for this public entity to perform efficiently. Whereas in the Indian context, even though you have unbundled and corporatized, there is really no incentive to perform efficiently, because you can continue performing inefficiently and you don't lose much. Nobody is accountable, nobody is going to pay any price for it. So that is the key. Or if you really privatize and if you can introduce 100% competition, then competition acts as a driving force and will incentivize the private owners to perform more efficiently. Otherwise, they will lose out. Now, in the power sector, having perfect competition is also a very difficult thing because it is prone to market power. So given this, it is not, in my opinion, a question of ownership, it's more a question of incentives. And representation of stakeholders in whatever institutional mechanism that we can think of. In that context, again, Sri Kumar mentioned this in his presentation that stakeholders should have a representation in the decision making. And I envisage these rural energy cooperatives as a place where the community will participate. I don't have the nuts and bolts of how it can be worked out. What I'm putting out here is an idea, but this will have to be worked through in terms of the details. So in order to get this going, we need specific legislation by government which could facilitate the formation of these rural energy cooperatives. Innovative approaches should be adopted in the design of these RECs so that there is community ownership and participation. There is also scope for private inputs to enable efficient technology designs and management practices because local communities may not have the expertise in terms of management or technical know-how, and if this input can be given to them in some form. Again, incentives will have to be given to the private sector to be wanting to deliver this. And appropriate pricing and incentive mechanisms to promote the harnessing of renewable and non-renewable energy sources in a socially and economically optimal manner. In other words, one need not take a prejudged issue on what percentage of renewable or what percentage of non-renewable. It should be on the basis of the opportunity costs as the whole mix of use evolves over time. And Mr. Balanmurthy showed in his slide that by 2050 you will have a mix of conventional hydro and then conventional thermal, renewable a certain proportion. That might be the maximum possible under present technology scenarios, and for all we know, if technological methods evolve, maybe we could even increase. But that should be on the opportunity cost at that point of time. So evolution should happen over a period of time. And appropriate mechanisms for external governance and regulation of the RECs must also be in place. Because any cooperative mechanism can fall apart if the members don't cooperate. And typically, either a cooperative mechanism or a cartel type of an organization can continue its cooperation as long as there are significant external mechanisms that will force them to cooperate. And these mechanisms must enable the smooth functioning and sustainability of these institutions, provide enough flexibility and incentives for the RECs to economically exploit local energy resources. They should provide incentives for financial efficiency, and within this framework, the really needy farmers or the weaker groups should and must be subsidized, but I want to emphasize that the subsidies should be given in a manner that they minimize other externalities that will be brought about by the subsidy. So the external mechanism should also ensure that any subsidies given to the RECs are designed to be efficiently targeted with minimum distortions. For example, I have been arguing that the agricultural subsidies, instead of giving free power or power on the basis of per kilowatt, per 1 horsepower or whatever, one last minute and then instead of going on the basis of the horsepower rating, the electricity bill to the farmer must be based on the actual consumption of energy. And if the state wants to subsidize anybody, it should subsidize them to a proportion of their bill. It could be 70%, 80% or 20%. But the actual consumption should be transparent and the magnitude of subsidy that goes in should be transparent. Otherwise, and it also gives an incentive to the farmer to economize because he's paying at least 10-15% of the total bill. So if some of these factors can be thought about and worked out, then the rural energy cooperatives could give greater strength to the rural population, could give them more bargaining power, because otherwise in the evolving institutional arrangement for power, if things continue as they are, the rural populations might take even more severe beating than they are already doing now. So RECs could enable sustainable use of optimal levels of renewable non-renewable, and they could enable rural communities to have better access to capital markets and finances. Because there'll be more of cohesive groups so they can have better access. This is my idea. So the key to the efficacy and success is careful design of the institutional setup and careful design of who gets residual rights in the setup. Careful design of the governance and incentive mechanisms to encourage commercial viability and efficiency. Careful choice of subsidy arrangements that will support only the truly deserving with minimum distortions.
Thank you very much. Papers presented today, we have a very useful, very important points. For example, Dr. Indrakant raised a very important problem of differences in approaches of academics community and government. The government usually just works from the point of view of short-term or middle-term results, but the academic community more concerned with long-term trend. And I think that the opinion of academic community on energy long-term development should be given to the government. In this way, I would say that in India, the position is much better because planning in your country, continued planning, just provides the institutional arrangement for using the experience of academic communities, and also your system of creating some particular commissions and committees which supplies their opinion to the government. It is very important. Unfortunately, in our country, this development, institutional arrangement is not developed nowadays, or rather destroyed. And it is another very important point which Dr. Reddy said. This is clash of individual interests in society. This is really very important, and only academic community can raise this question and develop this to a necessary extent. This point is very important for the present day Russia, because nowadays the general opinion which is translated by TV and by all the information is that individual interests are much more important than the interests of the state. In this way, by individual interest, also consider the interest of the leaders of big, sometimes monopoly private companies, who is really capable of influencing the course of development. And unfortunately, this particular point of view is one of the main reasons for very lopsided evolution of present-day Russia. Another, I think, another very important thing which was revealed by the present session is the lack of information even among the academic community. In so many reports we had today, the Russia was presented as a country without energy problems. I think the presentation of Dr. Stasyuk just have shown the very grave problem we have in energy section in Russia. For example, the problem of energy potential versus strategy of their development. Another one, which Dr. Stasyuk said, the adverse consequences of energy development without consideration of its negative consequences in many dimensions, which she have shown by map in actual facts. And also, this very important problem of energy development and its influence on territorial disparities of socio-economic development. This is also a very grave problem, which in Russia really has a danger of separatism in the country. It's very acute danger. I think in India this problem is also here, but the government has the territorial planning and some through planning institution have some ways of solving this problem, not in our country. And then very important problem of India, Dr. Hema here, this is an extremely difficult problem of energy supply to rural India. This is really a problem we do not have much. We have another problem, but in India it is a really great problem. It was revealed very excellently. So I suppose the academic community could in some way to start giving the opinion to the government of such research which was done by women research about that. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.